What's going on, guys? Vulkan here, and today we have a massive amount of new information for New World. I'm talking about brand new weapons, zones, new PvP and PvE modes, new expeditions, a look at what should be coming in the cash shop, new armor sets, all kinds of new stuff. And all of this was data mined by the community and then put together in a really nice spreadsheet. So I want to heavily iterate. Nothing here was found by me. All the credit goes to the amazing folks who put this thing together, and they've all been linked in the description below, at least everyone that I was told was a part of this. So please feel free to reach out to them and help support what they're doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to it. I want to get started and kick this whole thing off with a look at the brand new zone, Brimstone Sands. And the cool thing here is we actually have gameplay of this brand new zone. So what you're seeing right here is the brand new area. And you're probably like me, how did they manage to get there? Well, their characters were bugged and they were able to walk on water and not have any problems. So they didn't die. They were able just to walk straight across the ocean essentially and then end up in Brimstone Sands. So from here, we also have a bunch of data mined information. So this area is most likely going to be a level 60 plus area. There's going to be a lot of Egyptian mythology that kind of comes out of this. And there are a bunch of different sub areas of Brimstone Sands. We have the Oasis, the Dead Zone, the Barren Wastes, the Searing Sands, the Scorched Battlefield, the Windswept Highlands, the Shattered Foothills, the Jagged Edge, and the Ancient's Rise. Now, scattered throughout this new area is a brand new resource called Sandstone. And within Brimstone Sands, you can also find things like coarse sand, fine sand, silty sand, and charged sand. So obviously, like you, I'm curious as to what we're going to be using these new resources for. Are we going to be taking this sand and melting it down to make glass keys, to get into maybe new dungeons? Are we going to use those to make scopes for our muskets, to add on some extra range and different attachments? Or are we just reading way too far into this and it's just a new crafting material used to make whatever comes with this new area? So a lot of cool stuff here, and I cannot wait for us to actually get in there. I know we haven't even hit launch yet because of delay, but I'm really excited because I like desert style zones. So this is one that really kind of speaks to me. And to build on this new area, we also have a rough guess at what the full game world of New World looks like. So this kind of crude map was put together by visualizing the data that we have access to. And here we can see a lot of the areas that we have access to today. And then we also see the new Brimstone Sands area here. But then we also have all of these other areas that are under development for future content drops, including some kind of cool island strands along the top. And this has me really wondering, are we going to have naval battles in the future, or maybe naval content in order to battle for these islands? I'm not entirely sure. I think that would be really cool. Time will tell, and I'm honestly up to be a pirate. So let's go ahead and get that done. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next section, and that's going to be the new game modes that were data mined. So from the top, we have a PvP arena that was pulled out. And I know this is one of the most heavily requested features. People are looking to get into an arena to do 2v2s, 3v3s, 5v5s. And something like this would be really cool to see, because right now, if you think about it, you have your regular duels, and then you have these large scale PvP encounters. So there really is a gap for something like a PvP arena. Then we also have tournaments, which are another thing that's kind of interesting. And what would these tournaments be, right? Would it be like a player versus player knockout tournament, a player versus environment wave-based clears for the arena to see how far you can go, kind of like last epoch? I'm not entirely sure, but tournaments are something kind of cool, and I'm curious to see what they actually want to do with this. Hopefully it's not just like leaderboards and, you know, the highest score wins. Hopefully it's something more like March Madness, where, you know, you can have these different teams that jump in and you lose, you're knocked out, and the champion gets something specific, maybe like a cosmetic piece of gear. Then we have dungeon mutations for the PvE side of the house, right? So we don't really know what these are, but let's take a couple stabs. So dungeon mutation, so a change to a dungeon. I'm thinking maybe these might be weekly changes to dungeons to give enemies new mechanics, or maybe change the dungeon to a different type of encounter, or maybe even change the way you progress through the dungeon. You know, you have this door here that typically opens. Well, now it's closed and you have to go a different direction, or maybe the enemies are swapped out. You know, last time you fought a bunch of undead in Amrine, but now it's swapped out with something completely different. So something like that would be really cool, and I think it could be very easily done. I mean, you can take a lot of the portal enemies and just toss them in there to create kind of a different environment. Maybe it'll be like Mythic Plus keys from World of Warcraft. I'm not entirely sure, but this is something I definitely want to keep my eye on, and I hope it makes it to the game. Then we also have the main storyline upgrading from 45 to 60. This one makes complete sense. We need to have the full storyline that actually takes us up to level 60. Hopefully it's a bit more fleshed out than what we saw in the beta, but this is also coming. So let's go ahead and talk about the brand new PvE content next, and that is the dungeons, aka expeditions. And here we're looking at 6 brand new expeditions: the Frozen Passage, the Unholy Depths, Barnacles and Black Powder, Outriders Caverns, the Ennead, and Isabella's Lair. So Frozen Passage is going to be up in the Great Cleave, and the 2 bosses you're going to fight there are the Heavy and the Corrupted Ogre. The Unholy Depths, also in the Great Cleave. We don't know the bosses there. Barnacles and Black Powder is actually going to take place in Cutlass Keys, which makes sense, you know, pirates. And you get a title reward for completing this one called Dissonant Dissident, and you're going to be fighting against the Siren Queen. The Outriders Caverns are going to take place in the Restless Shores. We don't know much else beyond that. The Ennead is actually going to take place in the Brimstone Sands, so brand new expedition in a brand new zone. The title here is Magister Militum, and the bosses are the Lotus Scarab and Crassus. Then lastly, we have Isabella's Lair. This is a level 65 expedition taking place in Shattered Mountain, and the title we're going to get here is Tempest Tamer. Now, interestingly enough, I'm curious if we're actually going to fight Isabella, who's the individual that we see in different trailers. I don't necessarily think we will. I think she might be a bigger lore character, and we might be fighting maybe like her right-hand guy or like whatever, some minions or something. So we'll see what's happening in Isabella's Lair, but that's really cool. We're actually going to get to go there. So that wraps up the expeditions. Now let's talk about probably the most exciting thing everyone's been waiting for, and that's the new weapons. And this obviously is also my favorite part of the whole spreadsheet, because these look super badass, and we actually have images of a lot of them. And then the Void Gauntlet, for instance, even has abilities that are attached, so maybe we'll get access to the Void Gauntlet at launch as an in-game drop. I'm not entirely sure, but let's go ahead and dive in. And I want to start with that Void Gauntlet because this one is the most complete out of all of them. So you can kind of see this pretty cool 3D model of the weapon here. And then we also have a full breakdown of the skill trees that come with this, and they're very detailed. So in the first tree, our abilities are Decaying Orb, Draining Tether, Essence Rupture, and then our ultimate ability is Void Conversion. So your Decaying Orb is going to fire an unblockable orb that passes through enemies and inflicts Disintegrate, which is going to deal weapon damage per second and reduce the damage absorption by a certain percentage for a certain amount of seconds. And then at max range, this Decaying Orb transforms into a Healing Orb and then returns to you, healing friendlies along the way. So very cool ability here that actually starts out as a damaging skill, and then once it reaches its total range, its max range, it turns into a healing spell and then comes back to you. So you're actually going to be playing almost like a game of beach ball back and forth, trying to pass this Decaying Orb through enemies, but also through allies. Now, some of the mods that come with Decaying Orb, you're looking at plus mana per enemy hit, slowing enemies that are already afflicted by any debuff, or you can press the ability again to detonate the orb early and cause it to explode, dealing AoE damage. And depending on when you actually press that to detonate it, it can actually flip over into healing and heal all your friendlies instead. So moving over to Draining Tether, you're going to fire a projectile that tethers you to an enemy, weakening that enemy and empowering you, essentially siphoning their life force. And this tether will end if the target moves beyond 10 meters. It's going to last a certain duration. And then the mods here are successful hits against tethered targets reduce other Void Gauntlet cooldowns by a certain percentage. We also have a percentage of mana regeneration while the tether is active, and you will regain a certain amount of weapon damage as health if the tethered target dies. Very cool stuff here. I'm really liking this kind of life drain warlock style of play. I think it's really, really cool. Let's go ahead and move into the next ability, and that's Essence Rupture. So here we're going to fire another projectile that inflicts Essence Rupture for a certain number of seconds. It's also going to heal anyone that hits the target for a percentage of the damage done. So again, you're basically going to mark an enemy, and any damage that your allies do to that enemy will heal them. So very cool stuff there. The mods for this skill, players are going to receive additional stamina when they hit the target, and friendlies within a certain distance of the target are healed for a percentage of your weapon damage when Essence Rupture ends. So kind of creates that like last hurrah AoE of healing for everything. And then lastly, we have Void Conversion. Here you're going to gain a stack of Void Essence per successful ability hit. And at a certain number of stacks, your next successful heavy attack will instantly reset all of your Void Gauntlet cooldowns and remove all stacks. This is a very powerful ability depending on how long those cooldowns are. You pop this and you're going to gain a stack of Void Essence and use all your abilities. And let's say you hit every single one of them. You can just chain this almost over and over again in order to keep everything off of cooldown, and it rewards skillful play, which is very cool. And so something like this, I really, really like. We'll move into the second tree here in a second. But first, I do want to talk about some of the passives, the minor nodes that you'll be able to find out in those trees. So you're going to see things like cooldown reduction on successful light attacks at targets further than a certain distance away. Mana regeneration when successfully hitting targets with light attacks while all of your abilities are on cooldown. Mana costs are reduced while above a certain percentage of mana. Cooldowns are reduced per second while performing Harvest, which is another ability that I guess we don't know about right now. All we know about is Decaying Orb, Draining Tether, Essence Rupture, and Void Conversion. We also have successful heavy attacks against enemies below a certain percentage will actually restore an additional percent of damage done as health. And then we have any successful heavy attacks will increase the duration of your debuffs onto that target. And then dodging with full mana will reset that lowest active cooldown, which is, again, fantastic. I mean, you throw on a Draining Tether, it goes through, it expires, it goes onto cooldown. You dodge, it resets that Draining Tether, allowing you to use it again. This is going to be absolutely insane in terms of PvP and PvE. I don't know how much of this is going to make it into the game because it just seems like this weapon is going to be crazy. So that's the first tree. That's not even like the full thing. So let's go ahead and jump into the second tree and talk a little bit about this one. So the first ability we have is Void Blade. You're going to summon a blade of void energy that converts your basic attacks to melee. So switching your ranged gauntlet into a melee gauntlet, and it's going to turn your basic attacks into melee attacks. This reminds me of Infinity Blades from Wilson. You're going to tap your basic attack to perform a quick slash. It's going to deal X amount of weapon damage, or you can hold to perform a thrust attack that deals some more weapon damage. Both attacks will also inflict Disintegrate on successful hits, which will deal damage over time and reduce that damage absorption. Then the mods for this skill: critical damage increased on all Void Blade attacks, gain Fortify on start, which increases your damage absorption by X amount, and successful heavy attacks will heal yourself for a percent of the weapon damage per Disintegrate stack on the target. So moving into the second ability, we have Punishing Chamber, this is such an edgelord weapon. I love it. So Punishing Chamber, you're going to summon a circle of void energy at your feet. It's going to deal weapon damage per second to enemies and grant Empower to allies, which will increase their damage done. So again, we're looking at another ability here that's going to damage enemies and grant a big DPS buff to all of your friendlies. Imagine just dropping this next to a boss and you have all of your whole team there, and they all have great axes who are also stacking a bunch of Empower buffs with things like, greed, and it's going to be wild. So this is going to be crazy, stacking up and giving big DPS boosts. The mods for this one: your Void Gauntlet mana costs are reduced by a certain percentage while inside the chamber, and then your stamina per second for yourself and friendlies while inside the chamber, it looks like you just get a flat stamina boost. Next up, we have Petrifying Scream. Sounds like Horrifying Scream. You're going to unleash a void-infused scream, dealing X amount of weapon damage and inflicting root to enemies in front of you, which will disable their movement for a certain number of seconds. Wow. Okay, so moving into the mods for this one, the root duration is increased by a certain number of seconds on targets below a certain percentage of health. Then you're also going to gain Fortify on each enemy hit, which is going to increase damage absorption by a certain amount for the number of seconds per hit. So pretty cool stuff there. Again, more crowd control, which is kind of cool. And then the ultimate ability for this particular tree is called Void Aura. So on successful ability hit, you're going to gain a stack of Void Essence, just like on the other one. At 6 stacks, you're going to consume all of those, and then you're going to gain an aura on self that heals friendlies for weapon damage and deals a % weapon damage per second to enemies within the certain range, and it's going to have a duration and a cooldown. So this one's incredibly straightforward. Get to 6 stacks, consume all of them, get a nice little AoE circle, stand near your friends to keep them healed up, or run headfirst into groups of enemies to kind of blow them down. You can kind of choose the way you want to work that. So before we move on, let's talk about the other passives that come with this tree. We're looking at a damage increase while below a certain percentage of mana, a critical chance increase while above a certain percentage of health, critical chance increase while all abilities are on cooldown, cooldown reductions on all abilities when you critical hit, gain empower when casting abilities within a certain distance of an enemy, increasing your damage done. Harvest additionally restores X amount of stamina per second. On critical hit, you're going to gain health equal to the damage done. And then lastly, an increase to cooldown reduction on all abilities when successfully hitting enemies afflicted by 1 or more debuff stacks. And these can be from different debuffs. So overall, guys, the Void Gauntlet looks just absolutely insane. I mean, there's so much flexibility and versatility that comes with this weapon between healing your team, dealing damage, buffing your team, taking this like stacking ultimate ability and then converting it to either reset all of your cooldowns or create this massive aura that deals a bunch of damage. We're looking at a ton of cooldown reduction, a lot of crit, and just a lot of support. So do I think all of this will make it into the game? Probably not. This is probably something that was very early on. I think a lot of these are going to be tweaked quite a bit because there's just, compared to what we have in the game now, there is too much packed into each one of these abilities for them to truly hit the game and be able to be balanced in a efficient manner. So this is something that I think maybe half of that stuff will end up there, or maybe they'll split some of those things across different skills. But don't get me wrong, I do hope all this makes it in there because I will be a 1000% Void Gauntlet main forever if all this stuff makes it, because Affliction Warlock, you know, that type of play style really works well for me. So sign me up for this. Okay, so that's the Void Gauntlet. That one is the most fleshed out that we have of the entire list. Now, all of the other stuff is more of, okay, here are some gameplay teasers or some 3D models that we get to look at. So some of the other weapons we're going to be seeing in the game are the blunderbuss. Couple questions on this one. I wonder if it's going to be like a traditional blunderbuss where you just load whatever into that gun and then shoot it. And maybe it's rocks, maybe it's forks, you know, whatever you can find, shove it in there and then just fire away. Curious to see if they're going to go that direction or if there'll be a certain ammunition that'll have to go with it. Then we have the pistol. The pistol is very interesting because we've seen gameplay of this weapon already. It was in an official video from the New World devs. So, I mean, this wasn't datamined. It was like, hey, here's the pistol, you know, you guys can check it out. And we can see a player fighting against a portal using this thing. Curious to see what type of variations of the pistol we'll see. One thing they did talk about is we'll have a pistol that shoots cartridges, but we'll also have a pistol that is a like crossbow pistol. So once again, I'm curious if both of those will make it into the game or if they decide on one or the other. Then we have a club, aka a mace. Now, these range from simple branches and bones to actual maces. Hopefully for both tanking and healing, I think it would be really beneficial to kind of get away from just the sword being able to be paired up with a shield. I would like to see a mace paired up with a shield, and you can truly get that cleric feel or that crusader kind of feel to it, battle priest, however you want to kind of approach it, but I do think there is a justification there. Then we also have the two-handed club, two-handed mace. We have daggers. I know this was another big one that people were asking about. People love to play rogues, and it was very strange not seeing daggers as something offered, especially because during that time period, almost everyone carried a dagger with them. Not everyone could afford firearms, not everyone could afford a nice sword, but they could afford a shiv, some form of dirk, a small dagger to defend yourself. So it was really strange seeing all of these, you know, conquistadors, pilgrims, however you want to kind of approach it, not have daggers. Then we have the Angry Earth Staff. Now, this might be a special item that's used somewhere within the game, or maybe it's a legendary drop from the Spriggan, considering it's an Angry Earth type of enemy, but all we know is the Angry Earth Staff. And then we have the Longsword, two-handed claymore. Again, a lot of people really kind of curious, why don't we have claymores in the game? What's going on there? So we do have confirmation that at least it was data mined that two-handed claymores are coming at some point. And lastly, we have the polearm, maybe a halberd. This is different from a spear. A spear is basically a pointy stick. A polearm or a halberd is a long shafted weapon with a blade at the end, usually kind of hooked around. So these are gonna be really awesome to see in the game. I think that, you know, all of these weapons make sense, right? These aren't kind of like crazy off the wall weapons like the Void Gauntlet. A lot of these are, why weren't they there already? So hoping to see a lot of these make it into the game, if not all of them. And I think a lot of players are going to share that same sentiment. So the last two things I want to talk about are the armor set and the cash shop. Now, these do overlap a little bit. There are armor sets in the cash shop you can buy. There's also armor sets outside of the cash shop that you can go out and earn. So I'll throw a few of them up here that we can see what they look like, but I'm not going to go through every single one of them. Like I said, links in the description below. You can go through and check all of them out, but they do look pretty cool. So I do want to talk about the cash shop while we're kind of going through that. So the cash shop has been a big mystery, right? They mentioned we're going to have a cash shop and there's going to be stuff out there. And then people were like, we don't want consumables or, you know, experience boosts, things like that. And they said, hey, we hear you loud and clear. We won't have that in there for at least a year. So what is going to be out there besides armor sets, and how much will things cost? So we do have a kind of full list of all the items you can buy in the in-game shop. They're all things like dyes, armor sets, cosmetics, a lot of those type of things out there. And the pricing is the interesting thing. So they're offering different kind of bundles of marks of fortune, which are the currency, for a different price point. So for 5,000 marks, that's $5. For 10,000 marks, that's $10. For 23,000 marks, that's $20. 4,000 or 42,500 is $35, and 60,000 marks is $50. So if we were to go through and kind of look at what we had access to in the beta and compare that to what we see here, we're looking at a full gear set. We had the Aegis of Providence medium that was in the beta for 13,000 marks. That puts it around $12 in terms of value. And they did the good old classic, I love when studios do this. The price of the armor set's 13,000 marks, and you can either buy 10,000 marks, 5,000 marks, or 23,000 marks. So if you wanted to buy this particular armor set, you either had to overpay and go $20 in order to get it, or you had to slightly overpay and do the $10 one and then the $5 one in two separate transactions in order to get 15,000 marks and then have 2,000 left over. So this looks like that's probably the route they're going to take. I get it. They're trying to make money. That's fine. But this is the type of stuff that we can expect to see in the cash shop. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. That is all that we have for today, but my goodness, that was a ton of info. And honestly, I'm really excited to see how much of this will actually make it into the game versus what was data mined that was just left over from previous builds back when the game was like a survival sandbox. Curious to see what truly is still lingering out there and what is actually in development. Hopefully we'll see a lot of it, if not all of it. But for now, I would definitely take all of this with a grain of salt. And like I said before, all of the links are in the description below. So please go out and support these people who went and data mined all of this, put all of this together. So, you know, lazy content creators like myself can go grab it and then make videos about it. But before we leave, I do want to ask you guys, what was your favorite thing that was revealed here? Was it a weapon? Was it a new game mode, an armor set? Or maybe you're just excited that we're getting a Brimstone Sands desert area. I'm not entirely sure, but I do want to hear from you guys, and thank you so much for sticking with me. I know this was a way long video compared to what I usually do, so thank you again for all of the support. This has been Vulkan, and I will talk to you guys next time.